Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us here tonight. My name is Untu Val, Research and Advocacy Manager in the Penn Barbey Freedom to Write Center. And on behalf of Penn America, I'm honored to welcome you to this special event commemorating the Day of the Imprisoned Writer, the resilience of Pham Doan Trang. As we gather here virtually, we're joined by a powerful lineup of voices. We'll hear from Vice President of Penn America's board and acclaimed novelist, Dinaw Mengestu, who will be in conversation with Trinh and Quynh V, friends and colleagues of Pham Doan Trang, the 2024 Penn Barbey Freedom to Write Awardee, an esteemed Vietnamese writer, journalist, and activist currently imprisoned for her work in activism. Before we start, I'd like to take a moment to recognize our reader and professional members at Penn America. Our members are the foundation of our organization, and their commitment to free expression and literary advocacy allows us to support new voices in literature through our literary awards and programming, report the latest findings on banned books and educational gag orders, and defend writers at risk around the world. If you're interested in joining the Penn America membership community, please follow the link in chat. I'd briefly like to go over the code of conduct, and we aim to have our events as respectful spaces for panelists and attendees. Racism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, and any other forms of disrespect, harassment, hate speech, and intimidation will not be tolerated. If your behavior constitutes harassment, we retain the right to remove you from the meeting. We appreciate you respecting and abiding by this code of conduct. For today's event, I'll start with a brief introduction to the Day of the Imprisoned Writer and outline our research and advocacy supporting writers at risk. Then we'll show a short video about Pham Doan Trang before Dinaw speaks with Lom and V, who know Trang's strength and determination firsthand. They will share their perspectives on her impact and the urgency of global solidarity for her release and the release of others unjustly detained. Finally, we'll have a brief Q&A session and discuss ways you can help support Trang and other writers at risk. This event commemorates the Day of the Imprisoned Writer, a day of solidarity recognized annually on November 15th by the PEN International Network. Founded over 4 decades ago, the Day of the Imprisoned Writer shines a light on writers worldwide who are incarcerated or face persecution for daring to tell the truth. This day is a reminder that while free expression is a right for some, it remains a courageous act and a dangerous one for many others around the globe. This is a photo taken on the Day of the Imprisoned Writer in 2019. We worked with partners to hold a rally for imprisoned Ukrainian writer Stanislav Asayev in front of the Russian consulate in New York, representing his imprisonment with an empty chair. The empty chair serves as a powerful reminder of an imprisoned writer's absence and a call to action for their freedom. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge another writer in this photo, Victoria Amelina, who's on the right. Amelina was a celebrated Ukrainian author and member of PEN Ukraine who turned her distinct and powerful voice to investigate and expose war crimes after the full-scale military invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Victoria Amelina died in July 2023 from injuries sustained in a Russian missile strike on a restaurant in Kramatorsk, Ukraine. According to PEN America's Freedom to Write Index, the number of writers imprisoned globally during 2023 hit a 5-year high. At least 339 writers were known to be held behind bars, often for the sole act of speaking out against authoritarianism, exposing injustice, or challenging the official narrative. This number reflects a troubling reality. The drive to silence critical voices is alive and well, from countries where dissent is actively criminalized to regions where repression is increasingly normalized. In 2023, China was the top jailer of writers. Iran followed as second on the list. Vietnam and Saudi Arabia were tied as the third top jailers. Israel, including occupied Palestinian territories, ranked 5th, and Russia ranked 6th, marking the first time these two countries ranked within the top 10. Belarus tied with Russia for 6th, while Turkey, Myanmar, and Eritrea rounded out the list. PEN America, as part of its mission, seeks to support writers at risk through advocacy and by elevating their stories. Every year, we honor a writer imprisoned for their free expression with the Penn Barbey Freedom to Write Award. Of the 54 jailed writers who have received the award since 1987, 46 have been released due in part to the awareness and the pressure the award generates. Yet 5 previous recipients remain unjustly imprisoned, including this year's honoree, Pham Doan Trang. Dinaw presented the award to V and Zhang's lawyer, Dang Din Mun, at our literary gala earlier this year. We'd also like to take this time to honor 4 previous PEN Barbey Freedom to Write awardees who remain unjustly imprisoned, each of whom have shown remarkable courage in the face of repression. Xu Zhiyang, an essayist and prominent legal scholar, Xu Zhiyang was sentenced to 14 years in prison for his writing and advocacy supporting civil rights and government accountability in China. He was arrested in 2020 after going into hiding and writing an open letter calling on President Xi Jinping to resign. He's currently on hunger strike to protest the denial of his human rights in prison. Narges Mohammadi, a prominent writer, human rights defender, and Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Narges Mohammadi is serving more than 13 years in prison in Iran for her work. For decades, she has advocated against the death penalty and abuses in prison and for women's rights. She uses her platform to write and advocate for human rights behind bars. Ilham Tohti. Ilham Tohti is a prominent economist who advocates for Uyghurs' human rights through his writing and blogging. He created the online forum Uyghur Online to promote understanding between Uyghurs and Han Chinese. Arrested in 2014, he is currently serving a life sentence on separation charges for his blog. Chinese authorities have held him incommunicado since 2017. Vladislav Yusupenko. As a journalist for the Crimean affiliate of Radio Free Europe, Vladislav Yusupenko reported about life under Russian occupation in Crimea. Yusupenko was arrested in 2021 after reporting on an event in honor of Ukrainian poet Taras Shevchenko. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison on bogus espionage charges. These individuals are enduring severe punishment for their commitment to truth and justice, and we called for their immediate and unconditional release, along with the release of all writers, journalists, and activists worldwide who are imprisoned for exercising their right to free expression. We hope you'll come away from tonight knowing more about Jan, her work, and the injustice she faces, but also with a renewed commitment to stand in solidarity with imprisoned writers around the world. After the conversation, we'll discuss how you can get involved by participating in the hashtag Write to Jan campaign and the PEN Network's upcoming Day of the Imprisoned Writers campaign. Now it's my honor to introduce PEN America's board vice president and esteemed author, Dinaw Mengestu, who will be moderating today's conversation. Dinaw is an acclaimed Ethiopian-American novelist, journalist, and essayist. He's the author of 4 novels. His most recent book, Someone Like Us, was published in 2024. He's the graduate of Georgetown University and Columbia University's MFA program in fiction, and the recipient of a 5 Under 35 award from the National Book Foundation and a 20 Under 40 award from the New Yorker. His journalism and fiction have appeared in publications such as the Harper Magazine, Rolling Stone, the New Yorker, and the Wall Street Journal. He's the recipient of a 2012 MacArthur Genius Grant and currently lives in New York City. Thank you, Dinaw, for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Antu, for that introduction, and thank you to all of you for joining us this evening to commemorate the Day of the Imprisoned Writer. At in-person events, as many of you may know, we often place an empty chair on stage alongside us, as you saw in the photo earlier, to represent writers at risk, those who cannot be with us because they are unjustly imprisoned, killed, silenced, or persecuted for their work. Today, our empty chair is going to be virtual. Before starting our conversation, we're going to screen a short video to introduce Pham Doan Trang, her writing, and her work supporting human rights in Vietnam, and you'll briefly hear from her. As you can see on screen, during our conversation, we have a virtual chair to represent Trang's absence and the absence of all writers in prison for their work. The empty chair also serves for me, and I'm sure many other writers out there, as a reminder of the particular vulnerability that writers face as a result of the work they do. As we know, it's impossible, even under the most restrictive regimes, to control language and the imagination that fuels it, which is why all too often those in power target the writers whose lives are built out of the very language governments seek to control. Writers, and in particular writers like Trang, who are committed to change, stand on the front lines of our cultural and political divisions. They do so keenly aware of the particular risks they face. They work alone, they work in silence and in solitude, often without the protection or power of an institutional force behind them, which is, of course, one of the reasons why we are gathered here now, why PEN America and PEN centers around the world are committed to this work. It is our way of saying to the imprisoned writers all around the world that we stand alongside you, that vulnerability, exile, imprisonment, and persecution should not be the price for creating and sustaining our cultural heritage, for making sure that writing lives as a daily practice and not as the memory of one.
At the heart of Vietnam's struggle for democracy, Vietnamese writer Pham Doan Trang turned to the internet to speak truth to power when the Vietnamese-controlled media would not publish any criticism of the government. Her blog was a launching pad to her spearheading a movement for democracy in Vietnam, speaking out for LGBTQ+ rights, environmental protection, and fair labor rights.
Mới bắt đầu làm báo tôi đã biết là nếu mà đi lại khi làm báo mà không đúng định hướng, đi vượt ra ngoài khuôn khổ là có hậu quả rồi. Chứ chưa nói trở thành nhà hoạt động. Trở thành nhà hoạt động thì chắc chắn là có hậu quả. Có điều hậu quả đến mức nào thì mình không hình dung được.
On the morning of April 26, 2015, Trang was reporting on an environmental protest when she was assaulted by authorities.
Thì họ tấn công mà họ gây hậu quả là tôi bị gãy hai chân. Tức là nó thành tật, mà tôi nghĩ là thành tật vĩnh viễn, cả hai chân.
She courageously endured numerous instances of abuse and intimidation, continuing to speak out until she was apprehended late at night on October 6, 2020. Trang was arrested and sentenced to 9 years in prison for, quote, conducting propaganda against the state.
I'm honored to be here in conversation this evening with our panelists, Tri Hu Long and Trung Quynh Vi. Long is currently based in Taiwan. He's a co-founder and editor-in-chief of Loa Qua, a Vietnamese magazine about law, politics, human rights, and democracy. He has a background in law and Asia-Pacific studies, specializing in Vietnam's constitutional law, freedom of expression, internet freedom, and criminal justice. Vi is also based in Taiwan. She's the executive director of legal initiatives for Vietnam and editor-in-chief of the Vietnamese magazine, an English publication that covers law, politics, and advocacy in Vietnam. She specializes in freedom of expression and criminal justice in Vietnam, and she has previously worked as a litigation lawyer in California. Welcome, Long and Vi. I was thinking that perhaps we could start this evening with a little more background and context, something that can let us get a glimpse into Trang as a writer, as a friend, as a colleague. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about when each of you met and what were your first impressions of Trang?
I'll let Long start first.
Oh, thank you, Dinaw, and thank you, Anh and PEN America and everyone for joining us today. Meeting with Trang is one of my greatest honors in life. I met her for the first time in 2011 during an unprecedented protest movement in Hanoi. But before that, Trang was already a very well-known journalist for her brave reporting of injustices, human rights, and the territorial conflicts in the South China Sea between Vietnam and China. She was already very well known among journalists, and she and I joined a protest movement in June 2011, and that movement lasted for 3 months. I was able to meet her and walk with her on the streets in Hanoi, work with her on some articles, work with her on some petitions. Which together we try to raise the issue of the right to protest in Vietnam back in that time. So it's been 13 years. Yeah.
Thank you, Dinaw and PEN America, for giving me the opportunity to be a panelist this time to talk about a very dear friend of mine, Pham Doan Trang. So I met Trang about more than 10 years ago in the US. That was the time when she was a fellow at the University of Southern California as a writer. And I met her in May of 2014. And as Long said, she is a very well-known, prominent journalist, and at that time also a democracy advocate. But my first impression of her was that she was so kind. She was so humble. She did not give me any sense of that she was a famous person, and I was a nobody. I mean, I was growing up in the US. I read about Vietnam as you know, just to learn about it from far away. I have never met any Vietnamese human rights defender or journalist. And I knew about her because she was famous. She had her blog, she had her articles. But when I first met her in person, she was such a kind person, and she just wanted to make the country a better place. So that was the very first impression that lasted in me for a long time. And it is because of that kind and humble person that I chose to go back to work on Vietnam. And that's why I am here today.
Thank you both. I mean, one of the things obviously you're both noting is what a force and sort of presence she sort of always was in Vietnam, and how she was known already as a journalist and human rights activist, which makes it all the more impressive that she was also able to start a publishing house. So I was hoping maybe you could also give us a little bit of insight into how she was able to start the Liberal Publishing House and how she managed to do so, knowing that she must have been under sort of incredible risk to take on such a sort of bold adventure, and how she was able to do so knowing that the government's control over the media was incredibly restrictive.
Yeah, I can answer this. So, as you know, that private publishers in Vietnam are, legally speaking, banned. So no one can set up a private publisher. Of course, there is a gray zone where some private companies working with state publishers to publish books, but it's another story. Not only private publishers are banned, anything that are not in line with the government's policies, books that are criticizing the government and political books in general are also banned. So censorship is there to prevent publishers like the Liberal Publishing House from existing. In that context, there is still a movement in Vietnam. You know that in the communist Eastern Europe, before the collapse of communism, there was a Samidas movement, right? Where activists and writers published books regardless of censorship. They were so-called illegal books. And we have the same movements in Vietnam since early 2000 with some brave publishers. And the most prominent one is Giấy Vụn Publisher. So, and they published political books. They published sensitive books in Vietnam. For example, Animal Farm was translated and published by this Giấy Vụn Publisher. They managed to print these books by themselves at home, or they contracted with private printers to print these books, and they use photocopy machines at home to print these books. And they made these books themselves. Trang was part of that movement even before she set up the liberal publishing house. She was involved in the editing process of Samidas books, and especially working with the Zayvun publisher. And also, after the protest movement in 2011, Tran started to publish books, Samidas books herself, with the support of a group of young activists in Hanoi. Not many books, but she tried to document the social movements in Vietnam back then. I remember that she published probably the first Samidas book back in 2015. And then gradually she realized that people are really interested in learning more about politics through uncensored books. There is not only an audience, there is also a market. So in 2019, she established the liberal publishing house to realize her dream of publishing books freely within Vietnam. Of course, everyone knows the risk, and she is well aware of all the risk. But Trang is not the person we are talking the risk to. She knows, but she is the kind of person who pushes the boundaries, who expanding our sense of freedom, who expands, who increase the boundaries. She's always the one who stands in the boundary and trying to make unprecedented actions. She's that kind of person, a game changer, someone who breaks the barriers almost all the times. So running that publisher probably for more than a year, she managed to publish many political books, including her own books, and managed to make some of the titles very well known and very helpful among the audience. And of course, the risk is there. She was constantly on the run, constantly moving from one place to another. So basically, Vietnam is a long country, and she had to travel almost all the times. She could not stay in one place for probably no more than 2 months, sometimes no more than a week. So she was on the run. The ones who helped her distribute these books were also in danger. At least 2 of them are now in prison because they distributed books from the liberal publishing house. So that is the kind of risk they faced. But they managed to make a huge impact in the publishing field in Vietnam, and managed to normalize for a little bit, normalize private publishing in Vietnam. Yeah.
You know, that makes me think that alongside of being able to face those risks that came with starting the publishing house, that she must have also seen some, you know, as you sort of know, not only a market and an opportunity, but a kind of real need, you know, in the community and among the Vietnamese population for these types of books, and a kind of almost faith that if she were able to make this possible, that these books would actually have a real impact inside of the audience. And so maybe I'm wondering if you could both talk a little bit about sort of where that faith and where that sort of conviction must have come from, right? The sense that like these books, if she can get them out there, will be read, will move people, and will have an impact.
Right. So she had a lot of experiences with Samidas books before the liberal publishing house. Probably since 2007 or 8, she was involved in that movement already. She realized the potential and the impact of Samida's books. And then there is these things in Vietnam that a lot of books published overseas, right? They could not be imported to Vietnam. The custom will stop them whenever they see them. But somehow, some publishers, some bookstores in Vietnam still sell these books on the streets in Hanoi, next to in the central district, right? There is a specific street for that. They sell normal books, legal books, but also if you want some banned book, you can ask them. They're likely to have some of them. So we know there is a market because of that. There is a need because of that. These books published in the US, these bookstores in Vietnam printed them in Vietnam using photocopies machines, or maybe they somehow managed to brought those books into Vietnam from overseas. They sell them. And we know for sure there is a need, there is a market, a big market actually, because people in Vietnam are hungry for independent sources of information, quality information and knowledge. And before establishing the liberal publishing house, Trang published a few popular books already. One of the most popular is called Politics for Dummies, or Politics for regular people, right? For the mass. Yeah. It is a book that explains politics for everyday people, right? And it was published both overseas and inside Vietnam, and people were very interested in having a copy of that book. So because of those experiences, she realized the potential of books, and realized that people are willing to take risks to have a copy, to buy and to keep a copy. That is important.
Yeah, I also want to just relate what Long had just said. As a person who grew up overseas like me, when I met Long and Trang, I learned so much about the country that I left behind. But I grew up as a kid in that kind of community as well. So when you were in that situation, you kind of been in like a box. But you knew out there must be something else. And I think that's how people in countries like Vietnam, North Korea felt that. They knew that the government trying to limit their knowledge, information. They knew, and they want to seek out, there must be something else. And I cannot explain why people have that, but I felt that as a kid, because when I came from Vietnam to the US, things change dramatically because you learn so much more about your own country, right? So I think the Vietnamese people are the same way, and Trang knows that really well. And I think that's why she is a very effective writer, because she can see that in her audience. She can see that in the readers, and she knows very well that if I publish these books, people will want to read them. And I think that's something that I admire her for. She feels connection with her people are very well. And that was the reason she told us that she wanted to go back to Vietnam, despite the fact that she had a fellowship in the US and could seek political asylum 10 years ago, because she felt that there's the need for the information for her people. And she wanted to go back to do that, to be with her people, to write for her people and feel the needs of her people. So I think that's one of the reasons for her to do this. I just want to say, Trang is very well aware of the risk and the situation that she's in, the country of her. And she loves that country so much, but she does know the risk. It's not like she just do these things out of the blues and, disregard of the risk. No, she knew very well the risk that she's an encounter, but she accepts those risks because she wants to inspire more people. And I have to say, she is still the person inspires the younger generation the most, because of the way she works, the way she writes, and the way she does things for this. So I think that's one of the reasons that she's doing this as well.
Can I add one thing? Yeah, so
Of course.
when she started to print books in Vietnam back in 2015, some people asked her why not just publishing online, right? Why just putting the books online? Everyone can access, everyone can read. Why print? But this is the thing that for bookworms and people who support democracy movements, having a digital copy is good, but having a physical copy feels much better, right? We all know that. And having physical copy circulating inside a country that is heavily censored, it is a direct and the most probably the most challenging threat to the censorship system. And that is the way Trang wanted to normalize private independent publishing and free speech in Vietnam. Seeing an independent book, holding it gives for a much more sense of what would it look like if Vietnam has freedom, if we are a democracy. That is the feeling that Trang wants people to have.
Yeah. No, that's a wonderful way, because as you both were talking, I was thinking about how what she's sort of doing is in publishing these books and getting them out there, making them available, is so much more than just getting information out into the world, right? But from what you're both saying, it actually not only sort of inspires, but it creates a kind of both a community of individuals who are willing to take these risks together. And as you were just sort of doing, also makes possible forms of imagining, right? A way to imagine a type of future and reality that perhaps isn't there yet, but that sort of might be someday. And I'm wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about just how kind of critical that that sort of hope, that sort of possibility that she created, not only with her writing but also with this creation of this publishing house, for those around her and for those who, just the larger community.
Vi, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I think this is just my own personal perspective, but I think when people outside start talking about places like North Korea and Vietnam, you want people to understand what human rights are, what the civic rights are, but some people needs to give the is that kind of person. She doesn't want just to write about human rights, freedom of expression, but she wants the people be able to exercise that and and gain more people, get a community of people who actually feel it and understand it. So it's not just concepts that, in the West, they have this right, that right. But actually, as a person of Vietnam, you do have that right too. You have the right to read books that you want to read, read the articles that you want to read. You want to understand why this situation is A and not B. So I think Jan encouraged people to exercise that right, to take up your right and do that, and forming the community of people who believe in it. And actually, I think it feels like, actually, when do that, when you have those rights, you are free. And in country like Vietnam, it's like, when you do not understand liberty and freedom, and when someone give that to you, and you realize like, oh, I'm free. So yes, when Trang is imprisoned right now, I know that she is the freest person in Vietnam, because she liberates her mind, and she doesn't want to keep that to herself. She does all of these things to let people know, especially the younger generation knows that you can do that. You can be free. And I think that's part of my answer to your question.
I cannot agree with V more. The most impactful that Trang did is to be a free person living among people in an authoritarian and repressive country. Trang doesn't want to be seen as a hero. Look, she's brave, she is intelligent, but she wanted people to understand that speaking up and publishing books, writing articles, it is possible. Those things are possible even under very terrible conditions like she lived in before being arrested. She comes from a poor family, having the same kind of education that everyone had, living in the same conditions that everyone is living in. But she managed to do those things. A small and humble woman living in an Asian society, suffering from all kind of discrimination against women. But she still managed to do that. And that is so inspiring for everyone. And we started to see that, wow, if she could do that, I can do that too. That is her impact.
Yeah.
Did knowing obviously, of course, how difficult everything she was doing, all the challenges that would come with that, but also at the same time knowing how important it was for her to remain in Vietnam and to remain in the place that she loved. Did you ever talk with her? I mean, either together or individually, about potentially leaving? Was there any time where she thought like, maybe it's just better to fight this battle from abroad, from outside of Vietnam, and to continue the struggle, outside of the place that, of course, she really wants to be?
Yeah, V knows this firsthand. V, please.
Okay, so I think Vietnamese people who knows about this movement that we in, I think the two of us would be the ones that always get asked from others that, can you tell Trang something? Can you just tell her to stop a little bit, maybe leave the country a little bit to maybe save her? But Trang, even though a small and kind, humble person, she is so stubborn with her decision. I think we all read during the video, we could see that she does not want freedom for herself. She wants the liberty for her country. So yes, of course, we had been scared of her situation before. All of the time that the police harassed, beating her up. Of course, as her friends, we worried about her. We scared for her. We also knew her family, and her family also asked us to try to convince her. But Long and I also knew her as friends that, yes, we will talk to her, but we knew that she would refuse, because she is so determined of her direction, and be in that country, be with her people, write for them, inspire young people. That's her goal. And for I don't know how long, but for me, because when she left the US to go back to Vietnam, she gave me this sentence that inspired me, but I knew that's her conviction as well. And I always said this because she told me and a group of friends that every country needs a generation that would give it all, would give to make the country be a better country. And she said she wants to be part of that generation. She doesn't want to be safe for herself and then let the next generation do the work. And that is inspiration that I think I found myself in, that we want to be this generation. And that's, to me, it's kind of like stopped me from convincing her more, because I knew she wanted to do that. But yes, to answer your questions shortly, yet both Long and I have been in many times talked to her, but we also knew that she would not leave the country.
Yeah. Apart from that, so back in 2013, Tran and I and another activist living in Vietnam on the same plane, because we got awarded a scholarship in the Philippines for a year, and then we were determined that we would return to Vietnam after maybe a year or a few years, and Trang always made it clear that she would return to Vietnam. She had no intention of staying abroad for too long, and I couldn't count how many times we have convinced her to stay back outside of Vietnam. She returned to the country regardless, and after she returned, we also had so many conversations with her about leaving the country, either leaving for good or leaving temporarily. She never accepted that. We had never successful in never been successful in convincing her. It's just impossible. It is no starter to her. So it's just that simple. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and now, given where we are this year, 2024, what do you see, looking ahead as well, are some of the greatest challenges that Vietnamese writers and activists, in particular those who like Trang, are advocating for human rights, that they will face?
Can you just repeat the last part of your question? I think I could not hear you.
Yeah. Of course, yeah. It was just to ask you to imagine what are some of the risks that Vietnamese writers and human rights advocates are facing, both sort of now and will face, I guess, as we look towards the future.
Yes. Well, since I've joined this movement in Vietnam for the last 10 years, I think that the time is just getting worse and worse for human rights defenders, writers, and journalists. I think in all of these world indexes, like the one that PEN America just presented, Vietnam is increasingly became a very repressive regime for writers and people who want to express their thoughts. So, but at the same time, in 2024, Vietnam has seen a lot of political, I would say, chaos, because the political system in Vietnam had changed from one person to another person. I think we now have the 4th president of Vietnam this year. So in unstable conditions of the political system, I do not know how it would be better or worse for writers and journalists. I just hope that the government understand that the rights are there and is being protected internationally, and would think about the repression that they have put on writers and journalists like us and Trang, so that maybe we can continue to be able to write, to publish, and that is my hopeful part for the government, because I don't really know how the future will hold for us, but in the last decade, it's been getting worse and worse every year, for human rights defenders and also journalists and bloggers. So, but I don't want to say that it's going to continue to be that downfall. So I hope that there was time, but we very hopeful that Vietnam may make changes politically as well. Because in 1986, they make the very big change for our country in the economic reform, which is called đổi mới. So they knew, economically they need to change to survive. So I think politically also, we will hope that the government will think in the long term to do this if it is possible. So that's the hope that I always have. But we cannot say the good or bad part for human rights defenders and journalists. We just have to observe and wait. But at the same time, we will continue to do our work. Long and I are, working on our online newspapers, and we'll continue. We will continue to recruit more writers, more journalists to write for us, to produce things for us. And I think for Vietnamese people, the regular Vietnamese people, there are many stories that need to be told. And as storytellers, as we are journalists, we want to write those stories. And we'll continue to do that, regardless of how the repression would face us in the future. So that's my prediction.
Yeah. This is right. I think that we are facing a more repressive regime, but also a more capable regime in Vietnam right now. 20 years ago, the Vietnamese Communist Party was struggling a lot with a massive flow of information flowing in the country through the internet. Now they are mastering their skills in controlling the internet. They are very good at controlling the internet right now, and they have been able to force international companies such as Meta and Google to obey their demands. So that is just the government has been a lot more capable of controlling. But not only so, I think the biggest threat, the biggest challenge is probably more about people in general losing hope in our cause, losing hope in our struggle for democracy. They see that the government has been a lot more repressive and stronger and more capable. And look around the world, democracy is also declining almost everywhere. We are fortunate to live in Taiwan, a country where democracy is still thriving, right? But look around the world. It is easy to lose hope, and it is very worrying. But writers and activists like Tran is born for this kind of situation. She never loses hope, and she sees potential in ordinary people, in everyday people, in every situation. She sees changes happening in daily conversations with people, changes that are not reported anywhere, changes in how people behave, how people changing their attitude toward the regime and toward the values of democracy and human rights and rule of law. She sees that. And that is why she has been keeping faith in democracy, in our struggle, in our movement. I just want people to understand that, to see what Chang sees.
Yeah. It always makes you think exactly why, why somebody like Chang is so vital, and also why a government that tries to control everything would want to try to keep somebody that courageous and that sort of moving out of people's ability, out of people's sight, and out of people's gaze, which leads me to also imagine as well, like when she will be free and when she will be sort of released, and when she's able to walk out of prison, how you imagine her release will impact the community and the Vietnamese people.
Well, I think even right now she is making an impact on the younger generation already. I have talked to a few, I mean, not a few, but the young people from Vietnam, if I have a chance to speak to, they really knew about our magazines and about Trang and about her work, and they all got inspiration from the way she's been. I think she is, like I said before, she is the freest person in Vietnam because she has been able to write that what she wants and publish what she wants, and she exercised all of the rights as a human person should do. So so yes, I think she's already making an impact on the future. So if she's been released from prison, I think she will continue to do her work. I think that's about Jan. And that's why, even though she's in prison, that's why Long and I continue to do the work that she inspired us to do. I will not let any day that she spent in prison become a wasteful day. That's what I committed myself to, that I have this freedom. So I need to work. I need to do something and just to continue the work that she's inspired us to do. So it would be a great time that she is released. And I do advocating to the government to release her right now, not like in full term of her sentencing. But I think she is strong enough to continue this fight. But at the same time, outside, as a person who's close to her, I also want to fight with her and doing these things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that releasing Trang or any activist overseas is often seen as a failure for the democracy movements. It is seen as an exchange between the US or the EU with Vietnam, and Vietnam is successful in exchanging their own citizens for economic or strategic gains, right? So it is good to see her being released and being freed outside of Vietnam, but at the same time, knowing Trang, she would see being released that way. I just wanted the government to know that we don't there is almost no point in keeping her in prison. Why? First of all, her friends and her families and her supporters are already doing what she did before. We are continuing her work in a much larger scale. She can rest now, to be honest. She can rest, take all the time she needs to read books and having fun, right? And we are already doing what she did, and she has already inspired and mobilized a lot more people like her to join the movement. She is, she has, I think, I'm not saying she has finished her mission, but the mission is never finished. But I think she has done enough.
Yeah.
I want to invite everyone in the audience to, if you have questions, to please type them into the Q&A panel, and we'd be happy to have our panelists answer them. We already have some waiting in the chat, so if, I will pose some of them now. From one of our attendees, you started some major initiatives, legal initiatives for Vietnam, the Vietnamese magazine, all in collaboration with Trang. Could you tell us about how the three of you came up with these ideas and what was it like working with her?
Right. Oh, thank you. Last week was our 10th anniversary. We started this organization, Legal Initiatives for Vietnam, 10 years ago when we were all living abroad But the idea started in 2 years earlier, back in the winter of 2012 in Hanoi. Both Trang and I were journalists working for the state media back then. We were already activists, but we managed to have a job in the states media. And at some point, Trang and I were so frustrated with not only censorship, but also self-censorship widely practiced in the state media. We were so frustrated that our pitches and our submissions were rejected. We had to publish those articles overseas or on our own blogs. So at some point we realized that why don't we create our own newspaper, trying to like self-publish what we write. We actually already opened up a website. We already gave it a name, already started writing articles, but soon after that we realized that running a newspaper, a magazine, was so costly. We were very poor back then. We had no financial support, and we did not have the kind of knowledge that about laws and politics that we wanted to have. Not enough to run a magazine trying to educate, trying to inform the public about human rights and democracy and rule of law. We realized that we lacked a lot of knowledge. So years later, we were in a better position with some financial support. We were more knowledgeable about laws and politics. We were able to meet with people like V, who was a lawyer in the US back then. And then we felt that we were ready to establish this magazine, and we did. So Trang was our first editor, and we have been able to maintain and develop the magazine and the organization for 10 years now. Up until 1 month before Trang was arrested, she still submitted articles. She's still involved in our work. She never stopped writing. I wish there is pens and paper in prison so she can keep writing. But that's our journey in summary.
Yeah, I am a person who got so inspired by these two when I first met Trang and got to know Long 10 years ago, and I felt that maybe I can do something for Vietnam in working with these two, and it's been a great journey. I mean, I abandoned my life in the U.S. I stopped being an attorney in the U.S. and came to South Asian country to start working on these things with them. But I never regretted it. I think it's the best decision I've made. And we've been very happy working on these things because you could see the people wants to read us. People wants to be writers. And we like Long always said, we just want to normalize what journalism is all about, what publishing is all about. We are not calling on a revolution to do anything. We just want to write and write stories. I really wish I could go back to Vietnam and talk to the people on the streets and write about their stories too, because I think it's very important that people need to express the daily lives of them. And I think Trang is a great person to write about those kind of stories. Now, Long said, she submitted writings until the day she got arrested. And you know what happened at that time? That was when COVID first hit the world. And in Vietnam, it was not like a major threat yet. But Trang was the first person that I think was writing about the poor people living on the street of Saigon and what they're worried about, if they care enough about what this new disease is. So she was talking to these old men and women selling stuff on the streets to write about their stories. That, she concluded that as like, these people do not care about what the big pandemic hits the world. They care about their meals for the next day. That's the kind of person that Trang is to me. That we all worried about something else, something big. And then she paid attention to those people, marginalized people. Nobody cared about these people in Vietnam. And she went around and talked to them and wrote the article about them. That was the one that I still remember, that one of her last writings for us. But that's just to show you how the person she is. Yeah.
We have two related questions. Is it possible to be in touch with Trang while she's in prison? Can you tell us how she's doing, and whether she knows how many people are advocating for her release?
Lee, please.
Okay. We cannot talk to her directly because that's impossible for Vietnam to do that. However, we are in very close contact with her family and especially her mother. So right before this conversation with all of you, Long and I called and talked to her mom, her 80-something-year-old mother, who's waiting to just every month to have her to call the family. So what happened is Trang is allowed for visitation of her family once a month. And she could call her mother, I think twice a month for 10 minutes toward the end of the month. Unfortunately, she is in a prison that is thousands of miles away from her mom. Her mom lives in Hanoi, and her prison is close to Saigon. So it's like the whole country. So her mother could not come to visit her because of her age, because of financial restraint for an 80-year-old person to travel that far to go visit her daughter. So I think when I talked to her mom, the last time she saw Trang was a year ago, because her brother could come and visit her every month. But for for her mom, it's really impossible for her to travel that far to visit Trang. However, her family could briefly communicate to Trang about the advocacy efforts that we are trying to do. How detailed it could not be detailed because in prison they don't let you talk about these things. They're recording the visitation, and they have prison guards just sitting right next to them. And so it is a bit limited for her. They didn't really, I think I've mentioned this before, they really try to prevent her to get to know world news or national news. They only let her watch like agriculture shows on this TV of a province. So that's, I think, is the cruelest punishment for Trang, because as a writer, she needs to know about this information around the world. So her mom always said, like, when Russia invaded Ukraine, she had no idea. So when the next visitation, her brother told her. Recently, she learned about the former general secretary of the Vietnamese Communist Party passed away, because it was such a big news. Even the agriculture station also featured that. So it is a very limited information that she could access to. There's some thing that helped her a bit, that they allowed her to play the guitar in prison, not in her cell, but I think it's a community center has a guitar, so they allow her maybe playing the guitar like once a week. So if people sending music sheets to Jen will help her a lot, because she loves music and she loves playing the guitar. That's the updates that I have on her. Her health conditions, even though she always reassured her mom and her brother that she's okay, we do know that she suffers a lot of medical conditions before she got imprisoned already. And all of the requests of the family to pay for a doctor to come visit her and give her some proper diagnosis have not been responded to. So those are the concerns that I think the family and us are having for her, that we do not know how well she actually is, because she could not see any of the doctor, even though we offered to pay for it. And I just hope the guitar in that prison center give her a bit of mental health release, and keep her going. But that's roughly the situation of her conditions right now.
I just want to add one thing, that Trang has always said to her family that she's fine. But her doctor repeatedly says on his Facebook that there is no way Trang is fine. This doctor, he knows her condition so well because he treated her in the hospital. He knows full well her physical conditions, and there's no way, he said that there's no way she's fine. And this is what we are most concerned about. And we wanted to bring her out, whether it is in Vietnam or overseas, to treat her properly.
Yeah.
We have several questions that are all naturally asking what we can do to help call for Trang's release, and what kind of pressure can be put on the Vietnamese government to release her. Who has influence here?
I think that the Vietnamese government doesn't listen to their people, so they listen to foreign governments, to their donors. And right now, a human rights pressure is absolutely necessary. But also we need to see where the leverage is. So right now, Vietnam is in some crucial negotiations with the US, with the EU, with democratic countries about a few things. First of all, Vietnam wanted the US to recognize them as a market economy. Although, legally speaking, they claim in the constitution that they are a socialist-oriented market economy. But they wanted the US to recognize Vietnam as a market economy, so they would be able to export more goods to the US, and to enjoy better tax policies under the US laws. That is crucial, and Vietnam failed the review earlier this year by the US States of Trade, by the US Trade Department. But they still wanted to push for that. Another thing is that given the Ukraine war, that Vietnam has always been relying on Russian weapons, right? For a long time, since the Vietnam War. And given the Ukraine war, Russia is running out of their weapons. And Vietnam realized that Russian weapons are thus suffering in the battlefields. And Vietnam has been trying to diversify their collections of weapons. They've been going around the world to shop. They went to Israel, I believe Czech Republic, and they are trying to make a deal with the US as well. So this is crucial for Vietnam's national defense. So these kind of negotiations are the kind of leverage we can look into and look for in order to make some human rights impact. But for sure, these are things that probably almost out of our hand. But with human rights pressure, by NGOs, especially American NGOs such as Pan America, international NGOs. We can use this leverage to free some political prisoners. Yeah, that's what I hope.
Yes. I just want to add, if any of the audience who are American citizens, we actually can talk to our representatives in our district. When Long mentioned the free market status that Vietnam wanted to get during this summer, I think it is the advocacy of Pan America and us and a lot of people that there were the group of Congress people who wrote the letter to the Commerce Department stating that Vietnam is not a free market status, and if they want us to look into it, human rights conditions have to be improved. So I think it is very important to connect with your district representatives, regardless of who they are, which party they are on. I think the issue of Vietnam is something that we can all talk to them and explain to them the human rights conditions. And hopefully we can get a person who came from San Jose, California. I know the Congress people in my district would be very keen and really pay attention to Vietnam's human rights, because we have a huge Vietnamese population in that place. But I think in every other places, and Pan America had helped me to do advocacy in May of this year. We went to talk to a few offices, and they share the concern about human rights. I think I know it's not going to happen immediately, but we need to connect with the representatives of our districts and our place, so that they will know more about Vietnam and they will stand with Vietnam's human rights and people like Pham Doan Trang. And I think it's necessary that we all do this. The more we do this, the more, Congress would understand the situation. But I think in July and August of this year, the free market status of Vietnam showed that the administration will listen to our Congress people if they join efforts and crank out those letters. So I hope that we just have to continue to do it, right?
Yeah, and if I could just jump in, thank you so much for that joint advocacy that we did at Congress. I think it really pushed them to sending the letter. And we know that the Vietnamese government is looking to renew that review process. So it's something that we can continue working towards and pressuring the government. And within the new market economic status, one of the parameters is reviewing human rights within the country. So it's something that we'll continue to push for. And
thank you.
I'll also just mention that we're also asking people to become involved in legal initiatives for Vietnam's Right to Tran campaign. And so I'll save the full details for the last 5 minutes. So if Dinaw, if you want to ask a couple more questions, I can go ahead.
Well, I don't know if maybe we just have time for closing remarks at this point. Long V, I don't know if there's anything else that you really want to make sure we have a chance to touch on, things you would like to make, to say before we turn it over to Antu.
Well, I thank everyone who attended this panel today and to show support for freedom of expression in Vietnam, for writers, journalists, and for Pham Doan Trang. It's very touching to see this. And I want to thank Pan America for continue to work with us on advocacy. I cannot thank you enough of all the efforts that you have tried to bring Tran's case to the American Congress. I think it's very important that we continue to do this. Solidarity and resistance together, I think, will bring us all stronger. and maybe it will happen. I do have faith that if we continue to do this work, if you join with each other, we will make an impact. And I think that's what Trang wants us to do: continue our work, continue what we think is fit, is right for the world, for our own country. Trang would never ask us to go to like advocate for her, but advocating for her, for me, is also advocating for Vietnam's freedom and liberty. So it is the same thing as I've mentioned in my talk in the World Night. But yes, I think if we can continue to do this, it will give us some hopeful result.
I want to thank you too. Pan America has been so active and helpful in advocating for Trang. Thank you, Dinaw and Anh too, for your. I think you have done a very great job in advocating for Trang and raising her profile. And I thank the audience for joining us today. You shows that you care about Trang and democracy movements in Vietnam in general. And I think that we are in a new page in Vietnam's history with a new leadership in the Communist Party. We are also trying to build a new movement in Vietnam, and together, I think we can build a new movement, and we can make impacts. So let's do this together. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Maybe I'm actually going to ask one last final question, which is, what do you think Trang would want her supporters around the world to do to help that movement that continues to thrive, that she started?
You know what? When Trang was still free in Vietnam, well, what she wanted the most is that there are more writers, there are more people joining her in the movement. That is one way. Of course, there's an impact, right? More people, more impact. But also there's one way to share the risk with her, right? More people, less risk for each one of us. In Vietnam, we call it share the fire. So more people joining, less risk for individuals. So Trang wanted us to continue writing. So I write, I continue to write, and I would like to call on everyone to continue the movement, mobilizing more people to join the movements, continue to write books, articles, continue to run and to create magazines, creating more initiatives to continue this fight. We cannot afford to lose this country to authoritarian leaders.
I also want to add with the audience worldwide, learn more about Vietnam. I think it is so important that everybody needs to understand what kind of a country Vietnam is right now. If you look at what Pan America had done in 2023, we actually number 3 on that list as the top jailers for writers. I think a lot of people may be surprised, right? I am surprised that we imprison more writers than Myanmar. And I think if people can understand what the country Vietnam is, why Trang is doing this, why we are doing this, why we want freedom and democracy for our country, and spread it out. If you can just talk to another person, your friends and family, so that they understand. I actually also do advocacy in my own family too, because all of my cousins they are American-born Vietnamese, so they do not understand the country. But I think if one of us can understand Vietnam more, and spread that information, that would help a lot. And I think Trang would want to do that the most. I think when I first met Trang, she always told to me that we need to put Vietnam on the map, because around the world, people do not understand the political situation of our country. So she's doing this. She's writing for her own people, also to the audience worldwide, so that we can understand what the reality of Vietnam is. If we can understand it is like that, we can help to improve it, to make it become a better country. All I want to do in this life is to make my country a better place for everyone. So with your help, you can do that. You can contribute to us and with us. So thank you. Thank you for being here today. I am very touched to see the audience.
I just wanted to add just one more thing, that we are fighting for democracy in Vietnam, but we are also a part of the world movements for democracy, right? We are
Yes.
part of a lot of regional efforts, and we are willing to join your efforts in your countries, and also regional and international efforts in raising the human rights issues in Gaza, in Palestine, in Ukraine, in China, in everywhere. So let's do this together. Yeah.
That's right. Solidarity.
Yeah. Thank you both so much.
Thank you. Thank you for giving
Thank
us
you
this
so much.
opportunity to address a lot of people. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so thank you, Dinaw, for moderating the conversation, and thank you, Lom and V, for sharing your stories of Trang and experiences of working alongside her, and of course, for all of your work on democracy and human rights in Vietnam. Before logging out, we encourage everyone to write a letter in solidarity to Trang as part of legal initiatives for Vietnam's Right to Trang campaign. These messages serve as a powerful reminder to Trang that she's not alone, and they send a strong message to the Vietnamese authorities. The world is watching, and we won't stay silent. Participating is simple, and here's how it works. You can write a message, so take a moment to write a message of hope, encouragement, or solidarity. You can address Trang directly or share what her story means to you personally. You can find more information on where to send the letter directly on Legal Initiatives for Vietnam's website. However, we realize realistically that the letters may be intercepted. So we ask you to share your letter online. Post your message on social media using the hashtag Write to Trang. This helps amplify Chang's story, connecting her cause with a global audience and drawing critical attention to her case. Share the campaign. You can find instructions at LIV's website or PEN America's social media posts, which will be sent via chat. Please feel free to share with your friends and networks. Every message counts. By showing Trang that people around the world are standing with her, we can help amplify her story and draw attention to the broader struggle of free expression in Vietnam. Your participation shows policymakers that writers need greater support and encourages them to act. You can stay up to date on issues in Vietnam by reading LIV's Vietnamese magazine or Lua Qua. Please also follow PEN America's social media channels for more information about Nargis Mohammadi, Vladislav Yosipенko, Shu Young, Ilham Tohti, and Pham Doan Trang. We'll be highlighting these 5 writers as part of the PEN Network's public campaign for the Day of the Imprisoned Writer. We also encourage you to follow PEN International's channels and participate in the Global Network's campaign beginning on November 15th. Thank you for joining us this evening, and we hope you join us in standing up for Trang and writers around the world who are imprisoned for speaking out. We wanted to extend our thanks to our members for supporting this work, and we'll follow up with key information in the recording of tonight's event to all registrants via email. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, PEN America. Thank you, everyone.